everyone, my name is Marian Guevara, and here on this channel we talk about books, movies, and more. A huge hello and a huge thank you to all the new subscribers, all the old subscribers, anyone who is just clicking on this video, who's just curious enough to check it out. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your viewership. So it's been a while since my last video. I've been pretty busy within the months of September and October, but today I finally have time to film this video in which I talk about series. Not only going over some of the starts of series that I've accumulated over the past weeks, because even though I've been busy, still found enough time to accumulate some more books, and then also describe sort of how I approach starting series, reading series. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get started. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in a previous video, but when it comes to series, I tend to be very picky. You know, when you're reading a series, you have to devote a certain amount of time, and I just want to make sure that I'm devoting my time to series that I end up really enjoying. So oftentimes the first book in a series, you know, that's going to be the test, whether or not I end up following through or continuing on. My general rule when it comes to series, and I use rule in a sort of lax way, I mean, there are obviously going to be some exceptions, who knows, but if by the end of a first book in a series, I am not dying to know what happens to these characters, if I'm not clawing at the walls to figure out what happens next, if I'm not so invested in their journeys, you know, what's going to happen to them, I'm just not going to continue on. Ideally, by the end of the first book, my immediate priority should be the second one, or the following volume. If by the end of a first book, I say, oh yeah, that was okay, that was good, I like that, but I can read one book, 2 books, 3 books, several books before I can move on to the next book, before I feel like I'm in the mood to read the next book, then I think for me, that's just a sign that I'm not as invested in the series as I ought to be, and maybe I should just move on to something that really does get me excited. I think what has also influenced my mindset with regards to series is the fact that I've just come across other series that have raised the bar for me. So I remember, you know, a good example is The Mirror Visitor Quartet by Christelle Dabos. I remember the first time I read A Winter's Promise, which is the first book. It was years ago. I was on a book buying ban, so I had a book buying ban TBR, and I told myself that I'm not going to buy any more books until I finished all the books on this TBR pile. And I managed to get through 2 to 3 of those books, and then I picked up A Winter's Promise. I read it, finished it, and then the next time I was out, I was able to go to a bookstore, I made a beeline straight for the sequel, The Missing of Claire de Lune. Okay, I broke my book buying ban. To hell with all the other books on my TBR. I didn't care. I just wanted to figure out what happened next. So that's the sort of attitude or the experience I want when it comes to series. I'm so enthralled, I'm so invested that I just like, nothing else mattered in my reading except just finding out what happens next. Another great example, The Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. I had not even finished Selling the Sands before I ordered, or actually reserved, Arm of the Sphinx. I reserved a copy for myself at my local Barnes & Noble. But the thing is, by the time I finished Selling the Sands, it hadn't arrived yet, and I was getting impatient. So I was like, you know, forget it. I ordered a copy off of Amazon because I just wanted to know what happened. And yeah, my entire reading experience of The Books of Babel was just so, it was one of the most visceral reading experiences I ever had. Like, it physically affected me. And I want that feeling again. I had like this high. And I think when it comes to series, I'm just trying to recapture that high. I know it sounds like I'm making myself sound like an addict. Maybe I am, but when it comes to books. But yeah, that's the sort of experience or feeling that I'm trying to recapture. So I tend to be quite picky with series because I had such great experiences. Yeah, that's just how I approach series. I'm very curious. How do you approach series? Are you like me? Are you very picky? Do you try to be picky? Or are you willing to give, you know, a series a chance even if the first book didn't necessarily wow you? So for this portion of the video, I'm going to go over the books here that I have in this pile that are the first books in a series. I've accumulated quite a bit. This is what I get for attending a lot of reading sprints, reading live streams. That's what I get. I get influenced, apparently. Yeah, but all of these I'm quite interested in starting, but slowly, okay? I kind of want to pace out my series because, once again, ideally, if I read the first book in the series, I should be wanting to finish it. not move on to start another one. So the first one I have here is the Elric Saga by Michael Moorcock. Now, Michael Moorcock, I have known before. I read from the SF Masterworks collection, and he's part of that, so I know him from his sci-fi, but I also know that he's a fantasy writer, apparently. And I believe he's one of those fantasy writers that sort of serve as that transition period, or part of the transition period between, J.R.R. Tolkien's type of fantasy and then the more modern fantasy. When it comes to Elric, however, I don't really know that much about the character or the story. I just know that he has this place within, I guess, classic fantasy. And I've seen the name Elric, and I've seen images of the character sporadically during my journey throughout fantasy. So this is actually a bind-up of the first 4 books in the Elric Saga. So we have here Elric of Melniboné, Book 2, The Fortress of the Pearl, Book 3, The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, and Book 4, The Weird of the White Wolf. So there are 4 books in here, and this is only volume 1, and there are 3 volumes as far as I know. I was inspired to pick this up because Joanna from Joanna Reads did mention it in a recommendations video, and I saw this copy at my local Books A Million for really cheap, $8 for a bind-up of 4 books, and this also contains illustrations as well, so very, very interesting. I do want to get into a bit of classic fantasy, so I thought, why not try Michael Moorcock? The next bind-up I have here is of the first 2 books within the Book of the New Sun tetralogy by Gene Wolfe, who is regarded as a titan within classic sci-fi. I picked this up on the recommendation of Dr. Philip Chase, who recommended the Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. I really enjoyed that one, and the way he described the Book of the New Sun made me want to check it out. So once again, this is the first 2 books, The Shadow of the Torturer and Claw of the Conciliator. And I have recently heard other people read the Book of the New Sun. And I think the general consensus is that people appreciate it more than actually love it. I know that this has beautiful writing, but that the story can be dense. So for those who don't know, this follows a dying Earth premise. Our main character is Severin, who was once part of a guild of torturers, but has been exiled and forced to wander the wasteland because he committed the crime of showing compassion to someone who is meant to be torturing. So yeah, looking forward to this one. We'll see when I can get to it, but yeah, looking forward. Speaking of Dr. Philip Chase, The Way of Edan is another book that I need to get to. I'm kicking myself for not starting this series yet. But yeah, this is the first book of his Edan trilogy. And this book has been getting some love recently. So there has been an audiobook that has been released in which the narrator is Alan from the Library of Alexandria. And Broken Binding announced a special edition of this first book, The Way of Edan. The central conflict of this book is a holy war. You have a supreme priest, Bledla, who is leading Torlin against the rival kingdoms in order to take over and then convert them. And then you're following a sorceress named Sakara. She and her people live on this island, and she wants to protect them, her religion, her people, from these invaders who are trying to take over. So yeah, kicking myself for not getting to this. It is a trilogy, so only 3 books, and I do want to read some more indie fantasy for sure, and I really just need to get to this one. Next we have The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. This is the first book within the Riverfall Chronicles. This was a gift from the lovely Evie from She Was Only Evie. She actually got it off of my Amazon wishlist. It's part of, I don't remember if it's called Gaslight or Gaslamp Fantasy, but it's a type of fantasy in which I think the setting kind of takes inspiration from, from the Victorian era. So here we're following a man named Inkwell Featherfield, who is kind of a bit of a ne'er-do-well. He gets into, he's into pickpocketing, dodging the law, and he ends up entering this house and stealing this pocket watch. And then upon doing so, he has garnered the attention of entities that don't want to do him well, and he ends up being approached by this group of people who are proposing that they can help him, protect him, and that's as far as I know. But yeah, I do want to get into some of this. Once again, I don't remember if it's Gaslamp or Gaslight, but that type of subgenre within fantasy, because I feel that I'm going to enjoy it. Next is the first book in a series that has been getting a lot of buzz recently, I feel. A lot of people have been talking about it. The Broken Binding has just released beautiful editions of the series. So I'm talking about The Grace of Kings, the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. This is an epic, sweeping fantasy in which we're following this archipelago of Dara, which was once several kingdoms, but has now been united. However, this unity has not resulted in the prosperity and peace that it was supposed to bring about, and now there's unrest. And we're following two individuals, Kunigaru and Matasindu, who come from two different backgrounds, but end up befriending one another. And I guess they're plotting to sort of wrest control away from the current powers. And I think there's like a lot of discussion of, the differing ways that peace can be achieved and all of that. It's quite a chunky book, and I'm telling you, it does not get slimmer along the way. Like, they just get thicker and thicker. So that's quite a lot of book. So we'll see by the end of these 600 pages whether or not I enjoy it. Speaking of very chunky books, we have The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I don't really need to say much about Brandon Sanderson. He's very huge. He's very big, very popular within the fantasy genre, especially here on BookTube. But anyway, I've read Sanderson before. I've read The Final Empire back in college, enjoyed it, but I never continued on for some reason. And then I read Elantris the beginning of this year, which I liked. It was like a 3.5 read for me. But I said to myself, you know what? I'm just going to dive in straight into the meat and potatoes of Brandon Sanderson. And I would say that's the Stormlight Archives. So The Way of Kings is the first book. And yes, I got this massive mass market paperback edition. I don't know how to summarize the back of this. Once again, it's just a grand, sweeping, epic fantasy with, I think, a very interesting magic system. I think Brandon Sanderson is known for like his hard magic system, like, the rules and everything, explaining how the magic sort of works here. But I know you're following various different characters, and I believe it has something to do with like the return of some power. A lot of people seem to really like the Stormlight Archives. We'll see if I'm one of them. This is over 1,200 pages. So once again, similar to the Dandelion Dynasty or The Grace of Kings. We'll see. There's plenty of book here to make me fall in love. Now we move on to the last series in this pile, and I've decided that this is the next series that I try out. And the first book here is A Shadow in Summer by Daniel Abraham, the first book in the Long Price Quartet, or LPQ. You can thank Alan from the Library of Alexandria for influencing my decision. Also, Joanna from Joanna Reads. I believe she mentioned in one video that this had a pretty unique magic system. But reading the back, it describes the plot. It kickstarts off with the mysterious death of this woman, which reveals the conspiracy that ends up affecting the economic stability, future of the city this book takes place in. Very interesting. I think it's going to be more on character and intrigue, which I really enjoy. A little side story. I picked this copy off of Pingo Books, and I was just looking for the cheapest copy I could find. This one I managed to get this mass market paperback for like $2, $3. So when I received it in the mail, I kind of just put it on the shelf and thought nothing of it. But I decided one night to just, pick it up and flip through it a bit. And I discovered this. It's signed by Daniel Abraham. It is personalized to Susan. Lovely seeing you again. Hope you enjoyed the book. And yeah, Susan, why'd you let this go? You got a signature from Daniel Abraham. So we'll see how this affects whether or not I adhere to this rule I have. Because it's signed, I'm now less willing to let it go if I don't enjoy it. Hopefully I do. Hopefully I do. I mean, Alan, he loves the Books of Babel. I have an unhealthy obsession with it. So hopefully that will translate to LPQ. So we'll see. So those are all the first books in series that I have on my TBR. I know I mentioned in the title so many series starters, and this pile is maybe relatively short compared to other booktubers who have a much larger TBR, but this is a lot for me, okay? This is like what? 7. This is 7 starts to a series. Maybe you guys can help me decide down in the comments which series after LPQ do you think I should start next. So yeah, I would love to hear your suggestions, your recommendations. And yeah, without further ado, I will see you all in the next video. Bye!